So, wow, we got a full house. Okay, so I always like to start off these with safety advice. So please remain in your seats. We will have some unexpected turns in this presentation, and we don't want anyone falling out of their seats. So let me start out. What do I do with my clicker? Oh, here we go. Let me start off with a story. After about 10 years on the ATP tour, this is probably my favorite insider story. And the person who told me the story was a very respected veteran coach, so I'm pretty sure it's pretty accurate. So the place, Wimbledon, Center Court. I didn't know we were doing it this week, but this is wonderful. The event, the 2008 men's single final. The moment. So it was 2 sets apiece, 5-5 in the 5th set. Game was suspended for rain delay. You guys may not remember, it used to rain in London. I think that doesn't happen anymore, but it was a rain delay, 5-5. The ghosts, the year before, these same two players, Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer, had been playing with multiple rain delays. And in the 5th set, Federer came out and won the set and won the match. And Nadal was a little hesitant. So when Tony Nadal gets to the locker room in the rain break at 5-5, he's expecting to see his nephew nervous, rattled. What he finds is the following. If this were a movie, this is where the music would start. So he finds, I did that myself, you like that? He finds a Rafa Nadal who looks at him and says, Tony, I've been thinking about this since last year. And what I'm not going to do is make the same mistake. Last year, I got nervous and I played not to win, I played to not lose. And that is what cost me the match. I may win or I may lose, doesn't matter, but I'm not going to give in to fear this time. The result, he went out and won the match. His first Wimbledon, the first Spanish player ever since Manolo Santana. We'll come back to this story. Let me share with you some information. 30 years working with elite athletes and CEOs. I've been, as Angharid advanced, I've been modeling what elite performers do. And I put together a methodology called the Optimal Performance Formula. And I actually wrote a book about it, which did pretty well. But I missed something fundamental, which is what stops people from taking action. So what I've worked on now is actually a prequel to the Optimal Performance Formula. Okay? It's called the F words of performance. So what are the F words of performance? Well, the mother of all F words is fear. It is the biggest killer of dreams, ability, and potential. Now, as we go along, a lot of you now are probably thinking, oh, fear doesn't affect me. You'll think differently by the end of this presentation, I hope. And then there's some minor F words. They're things, there's about 11 of them, which either increase fear or help you control it. Things like focus, what do I focus on? Flow, if you're in a flow state. Failure, how you perceive failure. So we're going to discuss some of this. But this is, to me, one of the most important topics in leadership right now. So you're saying, so I love to, who cares? So what big deal? What does it have to do with me? Well, you should care. With the changes in the world, geopolitical changes, technological changes, trade changes, the world is more unstable and business is changing faster than ever. And in my opinion, managing and metabolizing fear is the most underdeveloped leadership skill today. Nobody talks about it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's my plan for today. I want you guys to understand what fear is, types of fear, what it looks like, and why you are affected. And then I want you to understand fear from a neuroscientific point of view, right? Physiologically, it causes changes. There's psychology behind it, and there's a neurochemical basis behind it. So you need to understand that so you understand why fear is so invisible and so powerful. And then once we've done that, then I'm going to give you some tools that you can take to try and unlock your performance and control fear yourselves and with your teams. So fear is a survival mechanism, right? It's hardwired into us. But primal fear, or original fear, as I call it, is meant to save us from an imminent, visible, specific threat. So there's a saber-toothed tiger right in front of you. You get a whole bunch of chemical and physiological changes so you can run away or fight. That's it. When that threat is over, it stops. So if you've ever been scared, at the moment, when that threat is gone, you see you go down. Modern fear is what psychiatrists call anxiety. This is the vast majority of what you will be facing in the workplace. Okay? Modern anxiety is different because it's sometimes unknown or potential. We're going through a merger. what's that mean for me? Okay, so you don't really know, but you're suffering from something that could happen or may happen, and you don't know how it'll happen. Sometimes you create it in our minds. Something happens, I give it a meaning, and then I go down this road of all the implications that could happen with that. But actually, nothing has really happened. I'll give you examples of this later. And it's sustained, which is the worst part. You can live with anxiety for hours, days, months, or years. And maybe some of you have actually been in that situation. And the worst part is, as Mark Twain said, I've had a lot of worries in my life, but most of them never happen, right? A lot of the things we worry about never come to pass, which is, from an efficiency point of view and a performance point of view, an incredibly inefficient way to invest your energy, right? But we do it a lot. So you need to understand what creates this, and then how can we stop it? So fear, there's two types of fear. There's the hardwired fear, which is really only a minor volume of the universe of fears we have. And the two that we all have, out of the box is fear of loud noises and fear of falling. If you go with a child and you put them on a transparent walkway, they will throw down, they'll be scared, right? You've got this before you have any cognitive ability to reason it. But most of the fears we have today are fears that we've been taught. So for example, and we learn by observing others. So if you've ever seen a child fall on the floor? And if you look at them and you go, oh, they cry. And if you go, oh, come on, get up, they get up, right? Seeing how your parents react to failures, right? You lose your job or you fail a course. You then perceive this must be a really big thing. And then we keep that story and we carry it with us our whole lives if we don't stop and look at it. And the other thing we do is conceptual learning. So we take something from a situation and subconsciously we apply it to another situation, but usually we do it wrong. The easiest example of this is somebody who's lived with an abusive parent and then has a fear response every time they see an authority figure, a boss, a teacher, whatever. And a lot of people have that. And again, a lot of this is going on in the subconscious. We'll see how it works. So you say, no fear here, right? Think again. Do any of these things sound familiar to you? Have you ever seen toxic behaviors or unethical practices in the workplace and nobody speaks up? If you haven't, you're rare, right? Every place I've ever been, I've seen people talk about this, right? So why do people not speak up? People don't usually come in and go, yeah, they're breaking the law, that's great. Or, oh, yes, these guys are real dicks, that's great. Nobody does that. You don't speak up because of fear. It's the only explanation. They're not bad people, they're scared, which if you think about it, you go, well, that's actually not good. Would I want that? Famous examples, right? Volkswagen Dieselgate, Enron, Boeing. These people knew what they were doing was way, out of bounds, but nobody stepped up. When an athlete under pressure all of a sudden starts dropping performance, that's because they start thinking about implications and not about the game. And when politicians and business leaders are seeing human rights violations like freedom of speech, and mass killings and starvings, and people don't speak out, because I think we all certain things we agree on, right? Killing children's not good. And people say, oh, don't talk about that. I get a lot of people saying to me, don't talk about that. Why not? It's just my opinion, and I think it's kind of basic, right? So when people are afraid of these things, that's fear at work. So the fear doesn't affect me, it's all around you, because fear is built into every part of our society. And companies at their most private level are tribes. Right? And the big evolution showed us that being part of a tribe is safe, and getting kicked out of a tribe could mean our extinction way a long time ago. But that's what we do now. We're afraid of getting kicked out of a company. So if you speak up, you can get kicked out. Schools are not designed to develop each person's talent. You have a wonderful, may rest in peace, brilliant scholar here named Sir Ken Robinson, who talked a lot about academia and how it has to develop. And it's not designed to develop each person's potential. It's designed to find the people who fit in the system and then train and select them. I know I went to an Ivy League school, and I'd love to say that's because I was really smart, but it's because I just fit into the system, and it's rigged. And when this is all takes us to live in scarcity and fear. And when we feel scarcity, I always say aggression is the bodyguard of fear. Right? So we then start thinking of our own interests, and we start thinking that winning means defeating somebody else. Those are just a taste of the types of impacts fear can have in your environment and your teams. Would we want this? I don't think any of us want this, but we live with it. All right. So let me explain to you the neuroscience of how fear is created. Now, I didn't want to geek out too much on this. So what I thought I'd do is I'd make a couple of story characters and tell you a story. Okay, so make it a little more fun. So the first actor is the amygdala. We'll call this Chicken Little, right? The sky's falling, the sky's falling. This is a nervous alarm sounder, okay? The amygdala's job is to take in all the inputs that come into the brain and determine their importance or salience would be the technical word, right? Is this a threat? Now, because it's Chicken Little, everything seems like a threat, okay? And the important thing is this occurs at a subconscious level, right? And then if the amygdala thinks you're under threat, it sets off a whole bunch of alarms and a whole bunch of processes like the sympathetic nervous system and hormones. We'll talk about what they do to that, okay? But the lesson is it's automatic, it's subconscious, and it prefers to have false alarms than to miss threats. So that's the first thing going on in your brain when you hear about a merger, you hear about something, your boss looks at you, whatever. Anything that happens that can create some anxiety is this. But you haven't, by the way, and you'll see this, you haven't sensed it yet. It's happening under the surface. Then it goes to the hippocampus. Hippocampus is Sherlock Holmes. He's a pattern detector, okay? So what they do is he modulates the amygdala's fear reactions. But he gets certain patterns. So you see an animal, fuzzy animal. No, wait, that's a rabbit. Okay, so he can detect the difference. But there are other things that the amygdala is not very good at. The hippocampus is not very good at detecting. The example I gave before of the abusive parent, right? It gets all lumped together into a dangerous situation, right? Since it also works at an automatic level, you get a lot of false positives that filter through. Because the hippocampus, when it doesn't know the answer, it fills in the answer. Here's a good example. You can read that, right? Nobody has a problem reading it? Your brain automatically takes a guess and says, this is what it should be, which is a really useful skill, unless your guess is wrong. And we'll get into more complex examples where your mind takes a guess, but it's guessing wrong, and that takes you down a really negative path. So this one is also automatic, subconscious, and it works with best guesses as facts. So this is really important because we'll talk later about what do you really know. A lot of times we know things, but we don't. We're just guessing and assuming, and that changes everything. And then there's the nervous system. So this is the Wizard of Shazam, any comic book geeks like me. So he was the giver and taker of powers, right? So what the nervous system says is there's an alarm. There's an alarm that came from the amygdala, and nobody has filtered it. So it creates all these physiological changes, which you obviously are familiar to, right? Heart rate, tension, breathing, stress, okay? Now, the important part is the wizard says, okay, we need to survive. All the resources, let's go to the muscles to run away or to fight. Let's take it away from the stuff that's superfluous. I know, cognitive horsepower, right? Thinking, higher level thinking. We don't need that. Right? Once you're eating, you're not going to debate with a tiger, right? We'll talk about debate later. So it takes away, and think about the situations you may find when you're under stress. Your cognitive ability starts to go down. Okay? So resources are directed to physical survival and away from cognitive ability. Then did you ever see the TV show Taxi? It was an American TV show. Yeah, right. Okay, so Reverend Jim Ignatowski, he was like the flower child, druggie, right? And so this is the endocrine system. So when the alarm sounds, he spikes your body, floods your body with all kinds of hormones. These are just some of them, right? Some of them will sound really cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine. These won't sound to you, right? It's to get you ready to fight and survive. But that's not exactly the best state to be in when you want to think and meditate and make cool-headed decisions, as everybody knows. So the important part here is the emotions, the body, and the thoughts become chemically primed for survival responses. And a lot of times people say, oh, it's like change resistance. Oh, that's an attitude problem. Actually, no, it's a neurological problem. It's your body is primed for that, and you have to bring this down before you can deal with it. And then finally, we get to Mr. Spock from Star Trek, which is the logical mind. It's your prefrontal cortex, right? Now, like the hippocampus, it's involved in processing patterns, but there's three parts of the situation that the prefrontal cortex can evaluate that nobody else can evaluate. Meaning, the meaning you attribute to events. The others are automatic, and they will automatically attribute a meaning, right? So when you're a child, you put your hand on a stove, you get burned. So you think anything that's round and flat burns, and then through practice, you learn to differentiate. When you stop and think, a lot of times you can say, the meaning I'm giving to this, the emotional meaning I'm giving to this, is that still valid? Right? I work with a lot of leadership people, And that comes up a lot. No, when I was starting up in my career, if I didn't have the answer to everything, I got beat up. Well, is that actually true? Because now you're a micromanager and you're not doing your job, right? So a lot of times we carry forward behaviors and beliefs that are no longer valid. The second thing the prefrontal cortex can do is evaluate level of uncertainty, right? Remember what we said before. Is it actually going to happen? How likely is this, right? A lot of people get into that and then they can't think of anything else. And they get off the rails on something that actually never happens. And the third one is the feeling of control. Do you have agency over this? Because, okay, well, this may happen and it may be serious, but what can I do, right? Am I totally helpless? So auto-determination theory tells us that the level of happiness you have is directly related to the feeling that you have of being able to choose your own and control your own life, right? So if you feel things are being done to you, and if you've ever done transformation or change management, this is where it comes in. When people feel change is done to them, this is what gets kicked off, right? When they feel they can control it and it can contribute, that tension and that anxiety goes down. So this is Kahneman's system 2, right? Thinking Slow and Fast, if you've ever read that book. This is a system 2. It's the one that can make conscious decisions, and it's your best tool for controlling modern fears. Why is it so difficult? Here's the story. So we go to a party, Chicken Little shows up, right? So there's an event, panics at any risk, as if it were a physical fear, right? And this, again, this is going on in the subconscious. Sherlock Holmes comes in, tries to modulate, but may not pick it up. So some false positives get sent to the nervous system as best guesses, takes the prefrontal cortex offline, basically, and starts to create these physiological changes. And then Reverend Jim spikes everyone's drinks, right? All of this is going on at your subconscious level, right? And we'll talk about how you can deal with this later, but by the time you realize that you're having a fear reaction, all of this has happened and you've attributed meaning to all of this. That's what I want you to understand. Because if you don't realize that, then you just keep going, right? So you have to be able to stop that and use the prefrontal cortex. The problem here is that by the time Mr. Spock gets to the party, the wizard's taken away his power, he's got brain fog, there's this neurochemical cocktail. And so people just get into this fear story and you cannot discern if it's real or not. And that's how most of us react. And it happens especially when you're under pressure, a threat to the company, then people get into these terrible reactions. So here's the good news. You can change this. Let's look at a few tools. Specifically, I want to talk about meaning. We talked about meaning. And I want to specifically talk about failure and redefining failure in your organizations, because this is one of the biggest handicaps I see. And mindfulness. So when I talk about mindfulness, people think it's like this flower child type of you thing. But actually, this is being proven by science, and I'll share with you some of the research. So meaning primes everything else. Let me tell you a story, and then I'll show you how this story changes everything. So this is a story of a university professor who's on the tube, and he's watching this father with 3 young children. The professor's an elderly fellow, and he's trying to read, and these children are just off the rails. They're jumping, they're kicking, they're doing everything, screaming, and he's getting progressively more upset and more bothered, right? And he's thinking, God, look at this. So he finally gets to a point where he gets up and he walks over to the father, and he's had enough. And he says, look, I just got to tell you, you're really rude, right? We all pay to go on the tube, and this is really unpleasant. And the father looks up at him, and he says, well, you're right, I'm sorry, but we just came from the hospital, and her mother just died, and they don't know how to deal with it, and honestly, neither do I. Right? Did you feel your emotions shift as that conversation went? Right? What happened? So this is the first thing I want you to understand. If you take one thing away from this, take this sentence away. Nothing has any meaning except the meaning you give it. I'll repeat that. Nothing has a predetermined meaning except the meaning you give it. So sometimes I'll have discussions with people. I've lost my job. So? Well, it means, no, actually it doesn't mean anything. It can mean some things, but you don't know, right? And that's where you start to get your power. Decide the meaning. We'll talk about how you can do this. Decide the meaning you give it. Because the meaning you give it determines the beliefs with which you act, which dictate your emotions, and those dictate your actions. So let's look at the tube example, before and after. Before, the meaning was these children are rude. So the belief was this is poor parenting, right? The emotion was I'm angry. And the action was I'm going to go chew them out, give them a piece of my mind. But after he understood a different meaning, these children are devastated, the belief was this is a tragedy. It's not poor parenting, it's a tragedy. The emotion was I'm sad and I'm ashamed how I acted. You see how that chain happens? We do that hundreds of times a day, right? Nick walks in, doesn't say good morning to me, right? So I can then say, oh, God, Nick hates me. That was that meeting yesterday. He's really upset. Oh, my guy's going to go talk to the boss. And I can just do this whole story. But maybe just Nick didn't sleep last night, had a bad day. Hundreds of things can happen. We don't know. So the moment you start to question what you know, right? And that's especially important, by the way, in feedback and when you get people's reactions. Oh, you're doing this because you want to make me look stupid. You have no idea why I'm doing it or anybody else is doing it. You have no idea why people are doing things. It may be wrong. You have the right to go and say, this makes me feel bad. But be careful when you claim ownership over what they're thinking or why they're doing it. Intention, never question intention. Question behaviors, but not intention. And that changes the whole dynamic. Okay, so power of meaning is proven by science. It's called cognitive reappraisal. This actually, and science, a lot of research has shown, has a deep impact on subconscious and automatic fear responses. All those characters we were seeing before in the story, well, this changes the emotions we experience. So it's really important to be able to do this. And also it changes the way our brains process events, including activation of prefrontal cortex. So doing this and questioning meaning allows us to bring Mr. Spock back online. It allows us to counteract all those neurochemicals and all those physiological changes and start to give more power back to the prefrontal cortex and make meditative, smart decisions. And increases our self-esteem. So let's talk about failure. So we know that meaning we give to things changes. Let's talk about the meaning of failure. I believe that everything you've been taught about failure is completely wrong. And I'm going to teach you why. You're not convinced? Of course, nobody ever is. All right, question. Championships are going on. Has anybody here ever played in the championships? No? Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any ATP. Because sometimes somebody goes, yeah, I was there. Like this Frey guy, right? Lives right around the corner. Okay, so nobody's played in any ATP or WTA events, no? Fair enough to say? Okay, great. So if you started training today, how many of you believe you could be in the championships next year? Hands up. Oh, come on. Nobody? Okay. Of course not. And I'll tell you why. Because you intuitively understand you need thousands of hours of focused, deliberate practice. You need to make tons of mistakes. You need to have imperfect execution during the years and corrective feedback before you could get to that level, right? We all buy that? Same thing if I talk about ballet, anything, right? Field hockey, same thing? Great. Okay. So why then do we do corporate training in the morning on some cognitive skill like psychological safety, and then tell people to bugger off and do it excellent? That's what we do. Why do we expect innovation teams to maybe fail once or twice, but not too much? Why do we take somebody who's functionally strong, like a good salesperson, make them a sales director, and not understand they don't know how to lead teams? Expect them to be great leaders right away, because leadership is a whole different skill. This is the way we look at the world. Now, if you question that and you can turn it around, you get a unique advantage in place. So where's the volume of practice that we were talking about in this? It doesn't exist. And that's the problem. Let me explain to you, because people say, well, we're just naturally talented. He's good. He'll be good at this, or she'll be good at this, okay? And this is the real geeky part, but I love this, okay? This is how people learn. Okay, normal person, this is correct reps or skill, right? So a number of times you do a skill and you do it right. So at the beginning, you do very few properly. Which is, you start to play tennis, like I said, you're not going to be hitting the ball 100% of the time, not even probably 10 or 12% properly. And then as volume goes up, there's a step jump once you get some fundamentals, and then you get better a little faster because you have some fundamentals to step on. And then there's a point where you come up here where you're pretty good, you're like upper tier, and then you jump up. And then the rest from here on is, the first derivative goes down, so you get better slower, but it never flatlines. And this is proven by science. And I'll show it to you in a minute. Natural talent only means this. Somebody with natural talent has a propensity to get up these first reps faster. They pick these first reps up faster. But then it slants out, and then they follow exactly the same line. And Dr. Anders Ericsson, who is the father of deliberate practice, his research proved unequivocally that volume and quality of training is orders of magnitude more important than skill when determining the ultimate skill you can achieve. So if you're worried about this, if you want something short term, who's going to, in 3 days, do it? That's fine. If you're actually looking for the potential of how you can develop somebody, natural skill is a lie. right? And even people who are naturally skilled will have to do thousands of hours of work, okay? So this changes your focus. When you understand that, you don't worry about achieving. It's not about the milestones and winning here. It's about becoming. It's about forming yourself into the best version of yourself. This is dopamine. This is a quick hit. And as we know, dopamine is a hit, and then that runs out really fast, saturates really fast. Then you need another achievement. That's why we're always on the treadmill chasing. Serotonin, when you're doing this, it's sustainable, and it's about creating a better version of yourself, the best version of yourself. And the really cool thing about this is that Dr. Erickson proved that this work creates the abilities that did not exist before. You're not unleashing some dormant skills. You were not Roger Federer when you were born. Impossible. You may have some propensity to go faster, right? But it's that volume which allows you to do things you could not do before. That's essential when you think about how you train people, how you transition, how you implement, how you transform, right? People need reps. And we don't ever contemplate that in a corporate environment. Now, I'm going to look at it from another point of view. Another famous researcher who I love a lot, Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford. She talked about mind growth and fixed mindsets. So somebody with a fixed mindset believes that your skill level is attributed at birth, right? So it's like your height, right? So, you need to grow for a few years and then you're not going to grow more. There's nothing you can do about that. Now, this view means that if skill is a fixed endowment, once you get to your peak, everything you do is a test. And if you fail, you are a failure. You're not good enough. It's really significant. That's why failure means shame, and they don't want to step out of their comfort zone. But if you understand what both Dr. Dweck and Dr. Erickson is view skills as dependent on practice. That's deliberate practice, neuroplasticity. And failure just means you need to work harder and refine variables. So failure is only an indicator of your current level of skill, and never your worth. And that's a huge difference. But that's also a huge difference in how you transmit it to people. If somebody in your team fails, and you say, wow, and you treat them this way, this is how we're going to act, and you treat them that way, then you're going to develop amazing people, right? So, if we redefine failure as practice reps, here's the paradigm. We define failure not as something to be avoided, but something to be actively sought out. You have to fail. You have to get those reps out of the way, right? Because those are the necessary practice reps to go from here, theory, to practical ability, right? It's only through those reps that you can go from here to there, right? Because to play at Wimbledon, there was no shortcut. You guys said, I have to go through years of practice. And those practice, I'll learn, and then I'll figure out what's right. Why is it different in a corporate environment? That's really important. But those failed reps are gold, because that's the path to make possible things that were not possible for, either individually or as an organization. And if that's the view you have, transformation is a whole different story. Now, C-suite needs to start thinking like elite athletes, because what I find usually is that so the best athletes in the world, the Kobe Bryants, the Rafa Nadals, etc., not when they start, but when they got to number one, they doubled down on getting better. They consistently look to get better. In business, we get to C-suite and we think, oof, if I say I don't know something or I say I need to get better, I'm not valid. That's really bad thinking. And how can you take an organization, ask them to grow, if you're not willing to admit that you can get better? And remember that curve. You always can. Okay? So that's how you need to change your thinking about failure. Okay? Now, to do that, you need a skill which doesn't exist right now in most places, which is leadership presence. Okay? You as leaders are the ones who can make the difference between this. You've understood how fear works. You've understood the meaning you can attribute. We talked about the meaning of failure. Okay? So humans are wired for stability and certainty, right? Homeostasis. If your temperature goes up a bit or goes down a bit, you're dead, right? We know that, and the body does that. And mentally, it's the same thing. If our environment changes, we feel instability. And that uncertainty and lack of control drives fear, right? We're talking about agency. I don't have agency. So teams, I said, are like tribes, right? They look to the elders, your leadership team, right? They want confidence, directions, and assurance. Now, it doesn't mean you have to know all the answers. And you can feel fear, right? But you need to remain grounded and create a forward, sorry, I was just watching the picture. I'll share this later. Create conditions for people to be able to move forward despite uncertainty. And that, to me, is metabolizing fear, right? So, to do that, self-awareness is critical. So in business, we teach people how to do strategic thinking and all these great things, but we don't teach them how to carry the emotional responsibility of leadership. And that, as a leader, your emotional vibration affects the entire organization. Okay. When pressure rises, humans fall back to outdated behaviors, right? What we were talking about, those things that are no longer valid. So this is where true presence begins, okay? There's power in the pause. Instead of reacting, leaders with presence identify. Remember that we said everything's going on in the subconscious before you realize. So when you feel the fear trigger, right? Strong leaders stop. Instead of reaction, they stop. They have a program response that they would do. They stop, and they between the stimulus and the response. And this pause allows them to first self-regulate. Okay, let me get rid of that fear emotion. Let me put my prefrontal cortex back online. Choose the meaning I want to attribute, right? Because is this meaning real, right? And then respond intentionally. So in other words, you give Spock time to catch up. Authentic power lies in that pause. People have a lot of trouble, especially in Western culture, with pause. Pause is power, especially when you're surrounded by anarchy and change. Okay? So mindfulness. So people talk, again, say, oh, mindfulness, this is like what you do in yoga class. Actually, a review of 30 meta-analysis. Now remember, meta-analysis is analysis of a lot of research. So 30 analysis of a lot of research, right? Over 40 years in sports psychology, which is the field I know best, shows that mindfulness is by far the strongest impacting variable on performance. Okay, so what are the pieces? Real simple, so you can take it with you. Self-awareness, I notice, right? Few people do that, because have you ever seen somebody in your team or in your environment start to get wound up and they start to go off and you realize they've lost it, they're just reacting, and then later actually you feel bad about it, right? That happens a lot. Self-awareness is noticing. Then self-regulation. So now I pause. I bring down all those physiological and neurochemical reactions. Cognitive reappraisal, meaning I choose. And I'll give you a tool for that in a second. And then presence. Then I return, and then I decide what I want to project around me. That is what leadership is about. That is what people will follow. That is an absolute game changer. And everybody I ever talk to says, this doesn't exist. Mindfulness is about being fully present in the present. In other words, it's not being driven by your subconscious reactions, not being driven about your historical meanings you've given. It's about deciding and choosing and taking power. It sounds so easy. It's really hard. Now, it's infinitely valuable. Back to our story. I only got 2 more to go. So I wanted to close the circle. So we start off with Rafa Nadal and what he learned about failure, right? Fast forward 14 years, right? For those of you who don't want to do the math, that's 2022. Okay, 2022 Australian Open. Rafa Nadal is playing against so he's already beaten up, end of his career, right? And he's playing against a much younger Daniel Medvedev. He's down 2-0. And remembering when he had learned about fear, he says, I know winning is highly improbable. So it's not about fooling yourself. It's not about, flower thinking. But if I fight every ball with no fear, I can hold my head high, whether I win or not. Because you can't control the output, by the way, right? That's ridiculous. Focus on the input. So he did that, and he went on to do a classic and legendary comeback, and he won the Australian Open, right? When you remove fear from the equation, he paused, thought, what can I do? And then decided to act in the best way possible. And it worked. So put these steps into practice for you to take away. Okay? You can take a picture of this one if you wanted. Become aware of when you and those around you are triggered. So it's realize when the conversation has gone away from who you normally are or who the other person is, and there's something triggering an emotion. Learn to pause and identify that state. And if you can name it, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling angry. Why? Right? Nick doesn't say hi to me, I feel angry. Well, hang on. Why should I feel angry? Right? Because Nick's just done the same thing he does every day. He comes in. Right? Maybe he didn't have his glasses. He didn't see me. Right? So, and believe, what do I have to believe? What's the meaning to feel that way? And then do the following. Am I 100% sure this is correct? Am I sure Nick is being a dick? Excuse me.
Not possible.
Or is it possible something else is going on? And the moment you open up that possibility, right, then everything changes. And then I suggest you go look for 2 or 3 alternative meanings. Reappraise, cognitive reappraisal. Well, maybe Nick's just having a bad day. Maybe he's got problems at home. Maybe he just didn't see me. Maybe he's feeling bad. But all that changes. Remember the subway story, right? The tube story. I went from feeling really angry and feeling these people were disrespectful to feeling really sad and feeling for them because I just got different information. So be careful to think that the information you're getting, either from your nervous system or from your previous models and your previous meetings, is correct. And question it. And then once you've chosen, magnify that presence, metabolize the emotion, and create a safe environment where everybody else, and again, it doesn't have to be, it's okay, there's no problem. Yeah, we're facing a tough time, it's scary, it's gonna be tough, and I don't know the answer, but we can build this together. That makes a huge difference. Instead of, come on guys, you gotta get it done, what's wrong with you? It's your problem, not mine. I heard that the other day. Oh, I'm not gonna make your problem mine. No, that's not leadership. And this is how elite performers lead themselves and others. So if you take something away, take this away. That's it. Thank you.